with this. So again, welcome to everyone who's joining us. This is going to be a shop talk with Preservica. They have a lot of great new information to share with us. And so let's just take a minute and share what we're going to do. We're going to have this great presentation from Preservica, and then there'll be a chance for you to ask questions. And then we'll finish it up with just a few announcements from CoSA. So I'm going to turn this over to Lori Ashley, and you can take it from there with the Preservica team.
Laurie, are you on mute?
I'm so sorry, my internet just vanished when it was time to start, so my apologies. So Lori Ashley here. I'm so delighted to join you and to be with Preservica again on this webinar. So hopefully I won't have another technological glitch. So let's go ahead and get going and continuing the conversation. So first of all, I wanted to congratulate everyone for surviving Election Day in America, which was pretty darn rough for everyone. And we certainly know that for some people on the call, this will be a trigger for transfer to archives action if you've had a change in administration. And so we wish you well in those efforts. I also wanted to say congratulations to CoSA and the Best Practices Exchange for a great conference in Nashville. Hallie, who's joining us today from Preservica, was there along with me, and we had a delightful time seeing so many of you in person. That was really wonderful, and also had a chance to see the state-of-the-art Tennessee State Library and Archives facility, which is really truly amazing. So thank you to the hosts, to the coordinators, the organizers of the conference. It was really so wonderful. And also, especially the Birds of Feather session, which happened, I think, on the Tuesday or Wednesday for CoSA, which turned into a sharing of success stories. And I think Hallie was there, and it was just wonderful to hear the good work that you're doing and the success that you're having in coordinating with stakeholders and reaching out to so many people who need services and things that you provide. So thank you for that, and welcome to this session today. So three of us are going to work through the shop talk. So Michael Hope, who's Preservica's VP of Marketing, myself, and Haley. There's Michael joining us from the UK. Say hey, Michael.
Yeah, hi folks. Thanks for facilitating this session, Laurie, and great to be with everyone this evening, and thank you for joining us. I've been with Preservica for coming up to 8 years, so many of you I will know or have worked with in the past, and excited to share with you and collaborate with you this evening or this afternoon.
And Haley, want to say hey?
Hi, everybody. My name is Hallie Grogan. I'm a Digital Archiving Success Manager at Preservica, and I work with customers on their Accelerated Success program. But prior to joining Preservica, I was an archivist at the state and local level in Texas. So bringing some of that experience here today. Happy to be here.
Archiving success, that sounds like such a wonderful thing.
Yeah, right?
Absolutely. So here's what we're going to cover today. We've got an interactive session towards the end, and we really hope that you will, we turned it into a write. You don't have to come on camera or speak up, so it's really a writing exercise where you get to add your comments to a board. But by all means, feel free to chat along the way. Hallie and others will be watching the chat, and if you have questions or there's something else you want to talk about or something else you need us to pay attention to, please do speak up. So a few minutes of welcome and introduction. You've met the facilitators, and we're going to just run through a few points about Preservica. Then I'm going to cover the session format and objectives, what we just hope to get out of today's session and the conversation that we're having with you. There was a focus group held with CoSA in June, and so Michael's going to talk about that. And there's another focus group that was held with UK-based archivists on this transfer to archives, and so he's going to share a few highlights of that. Haley's going to walk us through transfer options that exist in Preservica's product and something that's coming up. And then we're going to turn to that ideation, brainstorming conversation that we hope to have with you so that we can learn about what's working, what's not working, all the issues around transfer to archives, because of course we know you can't begin your wonderful description, arrangement, preservation, and access work unless the records get from the producers over to you. So we're very keen to learn where things are going well and also sort of process, people, technology, all those elements. And then we'll do a quick wrap up and CoSA will share a few details about some upcoming events. So hopefully many of you know Preservica. They're a software provider and have been out in the space for a good long time, working to industry standards, helping organizations, small, medium, and large, preserve their content regardless of what that is. So you can see here some of the great numbers: over 500 million assets protected and more than 1,000 file formats preserved, which we know is a significant number, but just part of the big bucket of file formats that exist and have to be managed in the electronic space. So, of course, Preservica is very proud of the US and around the world government customers that it has. The records that you preserve are the records of the people, and they're essential to preserving rights and access and all the good things that go along with what our public sector organizations do. And so they're happy to be building out, taking on more local government customers down to city and town level as people discover maybe that their microfilm is no longer working for them or too expensive, or that it's just easier to move from born digital to digital preservation. So it's a very active time in the market, and Preservica has come out with lots of different solutions and angles, and they're very proud of the success that they've made, and of course would love to have additional customers. So hopefully that will be what's going on in the future. Preservica has made a long-term commitment to collaboration with the folks who use the solution and to also understand the requirements. And so you'll see here some of the strategic relationships, of which CoSA is one of the most important and long-standing. And the research, I was active while I was with Preservica in several of these research projects with CoSA, which is why I'm here today on the Transfer to Archives conversation, because I'm deeply invested in it. Have learned a lot from CoSA members and public sector archivists and records managers over the years, but still much more to learn. And so that's part of what we hope to do today, is to hear more. So here's the session format and objectives. We want to rekindle that conversation about preservation requirements, not only for the permanent records that you hold in your archives, but also the long-term and permanent that might be upstream, sitting in enterprise systems or specialized systems with the agencies, or even third parties, because regardless of where they're stored, we know that long-term and permanent electronic records have special requirements, and we want to understand those and understand how we can help you be more successful. Haley and especially Michael are going to share a quick update about where the Preserve 365 solution is. It's in beta testing right now, and that's the solution we talked a lot about during the focus group in June, which was focused on which state enterprises are adopting Microsoft 365 and how does this preservation solution fit within that ecosystem to make good things happen upstream, preservation in place, if you will, so that it hopefully will travel down the line and be a good thing for the archives and the archivists who are processing the records. And then we want to brainstorm. We want to hear about things that are going well, things that could use improvement. Preservica, of course, is especially interested in tools, workflows, templates, things that would help you as the archivist get the content over the threshold into the archive so you can move forward with your processing and preservation work. So that's our goals for today. We do have, oops, sorry, got a very fast finger here. We do have one question. We asked this last time just as a data point, and we don't have a poll system running, so if you could just enter into chat your answers. I'm wondering if your archives is currently accessioning permanent electronic records. And I do know at the last focus group, we had some folks outside of the CoSA community from cultural heritage organizations. And so that's a general question. Are you currently accessioning permanent electronic records into your archives? So thank you. Oh, good. Lots of yeses. That's what we love to see. Thank you very much for sharing. So with this, let me turn to Michael and ask him to share with you some of the focus group's highlights.
Yes, thank you, Laurie, and good to see that, yes, there's lots of permanent records going into being accessioned into your archives. So as Laurie was saying, back in June, we had another focus group. Some of you might have been on that. If you weren't, then see if you can grab a recording from Council of State Archives, or we can, get you a recording on that session. We sort of zoomed in on the challenge of governing records within the Microsoft 365 world. And thank you for everyone that participated. We gathered a lot of information, a lot of feedback. Oh, Sean's put the link in there in the chat if you want to go and review that. And we also included a demonstration of our Preserve 365 product, which embeds preservation within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. Effectively makes preservation invisible, seamless, and allows users to operate through the 365 interface, but still ensure that long-term temporary as well as permanent records are properly looked after and properly preserved. So out of the back of that session, we produced a report, which you can see there, called Focus Group Report. If you haven't got a copy of that, then we can also put that in the chat. There we go. So that report is worth reading if you haven't seen it already, and it contains some of the output from those sessions. So it gives an indication of Microsoft 365 adoption across the public sector, and I think it was probably 90% of you that responded said that you either plan to or are already using Microsoft 365. But as we found with the other group that we ran there, which you can see is we've got an early access group also running, and we had a workshop specifically on archival transfer and involved archivists from not just from government, but from all sectors in that. And the interesting thing was they have very similar challenges, i.e. getting information into the archive is a similar challenge, but also in a similar way, their adoption of Microsoft 365 records management capabilities in the guise of Purview, lifecycle management, were at an early stage. So there's a lot of similarities between what's happening in the government sector as well as in other archives. So we'll come on to look at Preserve 365 and where we're at the moment. As Laurie said, we're in beta, and but it does open up new possibilities which we're exploring with our customers and with participants of the early access group, and potentially with yourselves, to look at how that can be used to not only help archival transfer, but also help preserve records in place or at the agency themselves if those records might not be deemed archival and might want to stay within the within the custody of the agency. So that's the report. I'd like to hand over now to Hallie. As Laurie said at the beginning, this whole challenge of transfer is about people, process, and technology. We'll come on to look at people and process when we get onto our ideas board, but we thought it'd be useful just to give you a little update on some of the tools and technology which are available from Preservica, which might be able to help and our customers are using today. So over to Hallie.
Thanks, Michael. So as a part of the Accelerated Success program at Preservica, I'm on the customer experience team. And so I work every day with specific customer use cases. And inevitably, we will have that conversation of, okay, what is the best way to get this content into Preservica? And so sort of depending on what that content might be and where it might have been transferred from, what metadata was or was not included, and what the sort of end goal level of access might be, we'll talk about one of many ingest methods that we'll mention today. So the most straightforward approach is our drag and drop option. And depending on what edition of Preservica you're working with, you can either drag and drop directly into the archive or via our put tool. So both options are via your browser. And while it's a manual process, it allows you to shape and curate that SIP package that you're creating, your submission information package, prior to ingest. And so it's a really great place to start. But then as your use cases become a bit more advanced and you start thinking about, that backlog that I know everyone on this call is dealing with, you can start to ingest at scale. And I think this works really well for records that haven't even been appraised or processed yet. The concern, is digital preservation. You can get them safely within to Preservica. And I have customers who are using Preservica to support their appraisal work by utilizing like technical metadata that's generated as a part of property extraction, or as a safe way to view records without having to worry that opening a file may change anything about that file. So these options include a transfer to the cloud method, or Preservica's incremental ingest via OPEX, which is our Open Preservation Exchange method. And it allows you to transfer a significant amount of records all at once, knowing that the workflow will efficiently break those records into sort of manageable chunks as a part of ingest. So for example, I'm currently working with a county clerk register recorder's office who selected Preservica as the choice to replace their microfilming backups. And by the time they started working with me, they had 4 years of vitals records that were not backed up via microfilm. And so it was a high priority to ingest those records as soon as possible within Preservica to ensure long-term preservation. And so OPEX has been a great success for this project. In over a year, we've ingested over 8 million records, with the majority of these records being ingested over a 5-month time span by one staff member who is creating the packages for ingest and quickly monitoring the process. So can you go to the next slide, please? And I think here we're going to play a little video. So in addition to the ingest methods I just mentioned, Preservica also has the external submission management, where you can invite record creators to transferred records to the archives via email. So let's walk through the process now in this video. Our use case is familiar to you, I would imagine. A city records officer coordinating the transfer of electronic records from the city planning manager, who is short on time. I love that part. So with external submission management, the records officer can customize and preview an invitation to be sent to the city planning manager. This customization includes space for terms and conditions to refer to state statutes or links to records retention schedules. And once that's finalized, the record officer can add the email address and an additional message directed to the city planning manager. The city planning manager receives the email and starts the transfer process, which includes 3 quick steps. First, entering contact information and agreeing to the terms and conditions, then adding information about the submission along with content description, and then either a drag and drop or selecting the records to upload. Pretty straightforward process. That's followed with clear instructions about the files being processed and the successful submission. Once the transfer has been received, the records officer can view the details of the submission, including submitter's information, content description, the files themselves, type and size, allowing her to save or delete the submissions easily before they enter the repository. And so once the records are preserved, there is the option to provide access via the public portal or keep them for internal use only. So I think back on my time as an archivist managing transfers of electronic records, and most of those conversations started via email and stalled once we got to the point of how to actually transfer the records. And so I see this tool as sort of that natural transition of that communication, where instead of stalling, I can send this email to submit the records, and it'll guide the records creator through that transfer process. So we've already communicated about what records, what retention schedule reflects. It's just a matter of completing that transfer as easily as possible. So yeah, who would you invite? I look forward to hearing more from all of you later on in the presentation. And I think next, Michael's going to talk about Preserve 365 some more.
Great, thanks, Hallie. So that's new out of the box. The
Yeah.
what Hallie just showed you there. So that'll be rolling out to customers over the next few months. So Preserve 365. This is what we discussed in the last session. As I said, this is what we call embedded preservation. It sits within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, and users can interact with it through just by using Microsoft 365. They can store and retrieve records that way, or preserve and retrieve records. And also the archival team can go in through the back door, if you like, and look at those records as they come into a Preservica instance. And I'll show you a little diagram in a while, which might make that a little bit clearer. But this also gives you a way of starting manually if you have records, long-term records, and permanent records which you want to apply preservation to in terms of digital preservation, make sure that they can be read and used. Then in using manual methods, an agency or the archives team can do a very simple transfer using SharePoint and just a drop-down menu to apply to files or folders and transfer them across to the preservation. And also another way of doing it is to have agencies to upload into SharePoint or to move records into a folder which the archive team can look through, and then they can perform the transfer to archive from there and do the accessioning whatever they want to accession. So you can get started very quickly and easily using this tool manually. But you can also, as we looked at last time, begin to operate at scale, which as the volumes of information, born digital information increases, we need to look at ways of automating. And so it also works with the Purview lifecycle management, records management capabilities, retention and disposition labels. So records can be transferred across automatically or by selecting a label, the user selecting a label. Those records can be sent for preservation or transferred if they're deemed archival records. So there's lots of possibilities here, and there's lots of use cases emerging, and we're exploring those in our beta group and then also in our Preserve 365 early access group. And would love to explore some of those possibilities with you guys as well. Just on to the next slide. This was a build slide, but it's come up with everything showing at once. Just this gives you diagrammatically how this might work. So you can see how Preserve 365 is actually preservation embedded within the Microsoft 365 environment. Users and records managers and archival teams can interact just using the Microsoft 365 interface. Using Preservica's automated preservation, then records are automatically maintained in your preferred or your state or whatever policy you want to follow. And as you can see there, this is marked as the records producing agency. So this gives you the opportunity to advocate for preservation to be rolled out across across your state into agencies that are using 365 to be able to apply preservation actions and file format migrations on records which might never go to the archives, but are also long-term or permanent and might just reside and stay at the agency level. So as I said, just users can manually move records. They can search and retrieve records, and if Purview is used, then they can select labels, and also the archives team can effectively use the Preservica interface to go in at the back end, upload records into the archives using the tools that Hallie has just discussed, but also transfer records across within the Preserve 365 environment. So there's lots of possibilities there and options that we're exploring as part of our beta and early access program.
Thank you, Michael. So now we're going to move towards the brainstorming, and hopefully you'll have your typing fingers limbered up. So as Michael has just explored, we all know that there are long-term and permanent records upstream in record-producing systems. They may be managed by the state, they may be managed by third parties, that are not ever going to come to the archives because they're agency permanent records or long-term. And so this preservation in place that Michael has described in the M365 environment, of course, is a very, very exciting development. It doesn't come, of course, without some work because we need the retention labels and policies active, and we know how hard it is sometimes to get folks to pay attention to records management rules. But there is the possibility, and we can help people to understand that the preservation requirements, that even though it won't come under the control and custody of the archives, who are the experts in preservation, there is still a great need for preservation actions to be happening upstream in the originating system. And of course, we hope and believe that good things that happen upstream north of where the archives are taking custody will bring benefits to the archives by more efficient processing, hopefully better metadata, as Hallie had explained. And we do know from the Preserve 365 beta test that there's a whole lot of metadata that comes over from SharePoint. And so that's the good news, bad news. It's maybe more than an archivist would want, but it's certainly more than they have maybe traditionally received. So we know that this transfer of archives is very important. We know that preservation everywhere is very important. And so we want to keep the conversation broad, learn from you, and talk about what's happening upstream and then what's happening in the actual transfer process. So we'll see if we can touch upon that successfully. So this is, of course, the reimagined, that we might have a record that's born permanent and very close to its time of capture or finalization. We might be able to pre-accession it or put it into a preservation repository on behalf of the agency, just because we know that it will need preservation action through its life. And so we can take the burden away from the users and the agencies, make it transparent to them, and make all the good things happen that happen in preservation earlier in the life cycle. And then, of course, there's many examples of long-term indefinite where down the road some action will happen, or an agency will need to refer to a record that was created decades ago in order to keep the process rolling forward, and it may or may never come to the archives. And so we want to see if we can't find ways to create that means of preservation action throughout the life cycle, and not just when it passes into the hands of the very capable archivists. So some of you were involved and may recall that we did a project a couple of years ago looking at interagency records transfer, eligibility, transfer requirements, preservation planning, and systems of record. And it was kind of a sad story and one of great concern, because the agencies weren't sure about what to transfer. There was a great disparity between the IT stakeholders, the archivists, and the agencies as to what protocols to use, what was available, how to make things happen. So out of that came a report toward a common understanding, which was very useful, but we knew that there was more work to be done. And so just hearkening back to that study, and you'll have to use chat for this poll. Tell us if all of these pain points and obstacles are still a part of your current producer to archives engagement. So lack of expertise on the agency side, whether they don't have the time or the expertise to be packaging the records or initiate transfers, a lack of knowledge about on the part of the archivists or the IT folks as to where and how the producers are managing records that have been identified as either to be appraised by the archivists or to be accessioned by the archives. I think we all know this one, lack of adequate metadata is a problem, and that it does force onto the archivist a great deal of potential arrangement and description work that would have to happen before the transfer of custody could actually take place. And then, of course, we know from the Move It report that sometimes third-party vendors, the arrangements or the understanding expectations about transfer and how that's going to happen sometimes are not put into the contract phase, and so it may be extremely difficult to get third parties to release the contract, or the content. So if you could, in chat, share with us if any or all of these obstacles are pain points in your current process, we'd appreciate that. So thank you, Grant. So a couple of issues on metadata and third-party systems. So we'll be monitoring that. So if you can share, we assume that to some degree you're experiencing these things. And there you go, Kate, thanks for sharing that. All of them, yep, it's a pretty common situation and one we have to keep working at. So thank you. Thanks, Karen. Good to hear from you. Appreciate all the input. Okay, so the project that came after that was the Move It, the modeling viable electronic information transfers, because we wanted to understand what does it look like when it works well. And we know that there are successful transfers and that people have been working very hard at it and learning from it. I would say that I think in that Move It report, there were 3 examples of governor's administrations, the records transferring. And so some of you may be looking forward to that in the near-term future. So in that case, we were looking with the help of an expert focus group at what works well and how does it work and all the things that go into the transfer. And that included the importance of collaborative relationships with the producers and with the IT, whether that's in the agency or in the state central IT, shared goals and a common understanding of what the requirements are, how to manage them, what the life cycle is all about, when things need to move. Excuse me. A big one, knowledge of the technological context. So where exactly upstream are all these records being produced and managed? And of course, the archivists are often outnumbered significantly by the number of IT systems used in the state. So we know that that's a challenging one. And then of course, flexible workflows, because the content that needs to be transferred has different shapes and sizes and volume and characteristics, as Hallie mentioned, and somehow that all has to be taken into account and happen over and over again. So the Move It report I thought was an excellent piece of work, and there was a simplified transfer workflow created by Nick as part of that project, and we're going to use those categories of initiation, packaging, transfer, verification, and closeout in this ideation that we're coming up to in just a minute. So a couple more slides just to get us organized. So in both of the reports and studies that were done, of course, the usual suspects are there, the stakeholders, the agencies or the creators and owners, the IT units, whether that's in the archives, central IT, third party, agency, there's lots of folks there that can be and are part of the process. And then of course the archival institution that has the mission and mandate to accession and preserve and take custody of these records. Also in the Move It study, they looked at a couple of other staff roles, and those included communications and administration on the agency side, technicians and authorizers. So all of those folks are in the mix and very, very important. So moving on. So here's what we want to do in ideation. We want to think broadly about the records lifecycle. We want to talk about tools and processes that are going to help you understand and what's going on upstream. Whether that's identifying and classifying records in place for preservation or the things that are coming through the transfer process. The second question we'll look at is what's on your wish list, the tools and templates and things that you as the archivist could use in order to facilitate and streamline and make that transfer process more efficient. and then the mechanisms at the end to verify and close out. So those are the three categories that we're going to use. So we're going to turn to an idea board, and we're going to put a link in the chat for you to, there it is, to select. And as I said, we're going to talk about initiation and packaging together, then transfer sort of separately, and then verification and closeout using that move it transfer model. And Kelly's going to help me monitor the chat and monitor what you're writing in, and we'll try to make it as interactive as possible in the time we have left. So there's a link in chat. You need to select that. And Gareth Bennett from the Preservica side is our technical support here. So Gareth, if you have any additional instructions for folks. There you go. You should be seeing the idea board.
Scrambling for my unmute there. Yeah, really simple. Hit the plus sign to open a box under one of the three different headers, and then it's free for all. Anybody can contribute, anybody can add comments, and you can also so upvote certain comments or questions or whatever is on there. So yeah, just get involved, get in the mix.
Okay, so copy and paste that into your browser and open it up. So the first, I'm going to launch the first one, transfer initiation and records packaging, by asking you, who are the star agencies in your state or among your records producers that are really good at transferring records on a regular basis? We did this in one of the other studies. So tell us who you, and I have some guesses, but who you routinely get good transfers from, where you've got a great working relationship. So somebody needs to start that process. And I'll pick on Alan. Alan, make sure you type something in. Oh, over in the, yeah, if we can open up a box under number 1 if you can. So who it is, Office of the Governor. Yeah. So that's a good one because the governor's administration change and those folks clear out. And so on the Office of the Governor, are you getting interim transfers, or is that just a one-time at the end of the administration? Let's see if I can see the idea board here. No regular, okay. Department of Workforce Development. How about transportation, environmental quality? Are those some of the ones? Any of your boards, their governance documents, meeting minutes, Public Service Commission? Yep, those folks have a lot of documentation. Okay, so those are some of the ones. Office of the Governor. Yep, regularly scheduled. That's great. So on the flip side, you can also enter who are you not getting the records from. You might have gotten regular transfers in the past, but you're having trouble. So mark those with a target or somehow indicate, I wish I could get, regular transfers from. Because I'm sure you have some on your target list.
Hey, Lori, I just wanted to mention that when I think about my target agency from when I was an archivist, it was all of the agencies that clearly had electronic versions of the records that they were transferring to me only in paper. And certainly there's the scenario of why we would still be wanting to get paper records, but starting that conversation of, could you potentially transfer the electronic version of this report that I see on your website as well, along with just the paper version of that? So just putting that out there for folks to think about.
Yeah, that sort of traditional
Yes.
way of getting things. And then, yeah, and I guess some of that goes back to who on the agency end is the one doing the work. Because sometimes it's easier to collect the paper, and then where the electronic content is can be a much more difficult question for, an administration person or someone whose part-time duties, right, are figuring out how to get the records over to the archivist.
Yeah.
So in the Move It report, there was a discussion about whether or not the notification, so somebody's got to initiate a transfer, right? So as Hallie said, it could be a conversation started from the archives end, or it could be somebody from the agency signaling that they have content that they're ready to transfer. It was mentioned that some of it's automated notification that might be in an IT system. So I would love to hear about anybody who's got some automated notification going out to records producers to remind them and that it's time to transfer content. So if anybody has anything to share about, are you using automated notifications and how does it work? And then for those who are using a manual notification, I know typically that you have records analysts who are assigned a set of agencies to contact. And so if they're manually notifying it, how is that working? How do they do it? Is that through email? Are they using a listserv with records coordinators? How are you, from the archive side, notifying the agency that there's something, it's time to transfer records? Keep typing. We want to hear from you. Let's see if there's something in chat. Anybody having trouble getting in? Hopefully you're in.
I liked how the report called out that an automated process can be as simple as like a shared calendar invite. So it's automatically going to remind you about that process, but it's not something that fits within like a much larger records retention schedule system or software. It's a process that we already are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So I thought that was
which is really important because there are so many systems in use, right?
Yeah.
And so, right, that's a good way of, I had to put a reminder to pay one of my mother's bills because I take care of that and it's on my calendar, right? So you remembered to take care of it. I had one other topic that I just wanted to broach in this transfer initiation and records packaging, which was to ask you, I've read hundreds of retention schedules and some of them are quite interesting that there's a length of time after. I saw one which was, 4 years after the end of a governor's administration transfer to the archives, which seemed to me very, very long. So I'm wondering if any of you have come up with new ways or would like to implement some changes to your retention schedules that might potentially help agencies and producers get better prepared, whether it's by telling them, if there's a preferred or supported file format you want them transferred to. Is there anything about retention schedule modernization that could help get content to the archives? And I guess a good example is Preserve 365, which is going to rely on those retention labels and policies inside M365. If they're set up in Purview, then that's holding the retention schedule, if you will, identifying record series and then enabling that to come through on the archive side. But has anybody got some good innovations or something that they plan to do with retention schedules that would make that would facilitate that initiation or packaging process? I think that would be great if we could hear about that. So while you're thinking about that and sharing, we can move on to the transfer. So this is the physical and intellectual exchange of custody. So we know at this point the archive staff is intimately involved. There's been a great deal of coordination, collaboration. There may have been some pre-work that had in the processing, but now we really want to know. Well, you're welcome here to enter some feedback and any questions you might have had on the external submissions process that Haley showed. So that's one place that you can put that. But I'm wondering about most used protocols for moving data. Are you doing it through your network? Are you doing it, putting it on drives and disks? Are you doing it through the cloud? What are your most successful or most used transfer protocols? Please do share. What's working? And I think this is an interesting area because it's a place where we have to come to a common understanding of what's available to agencies. And that, of course, will likely involve IT folks. And I know that from the Move It report that the archivists are looking for tools, flexible tools, because of the variety of the nature of the content upstream. So in terms of wish list of tools, what could you use? What would be useful to you, the archivist, in facilitating that actual data transfer, that moving of the transfer. Maybe Haley, you can join in here. Give us some food for thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of the external submission management tool of just, like I mentioned earlier, so much of this of the transfer conversations were started via email, and if they could just sort of seamlessly move, from email to a link to take you to the repository, I think that would help with sort of that transfer process. And to think that from the Move It report, like 50% of the time was spent on this one step out of all 5. So to be able to streamline the process even further, and to not have it require a sort of case by case, one-on-one relationship building within the specific RMO that you're working with, but to really have like a tool that would be flexible enough for most use cases. And then certainly you have those outliers where you need to talk about getting content out of that proprietary system. But for some of your like standard file format, like that you're going to be getting your agendas and your meeting minutes like pretty regularly, that transfer can just stream in after you build that initial relationship about how the submission process would work. So that's what I would imagine would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think another point in the Move It report was about applying lessons learned. So I think, right, it may take quite a bit of time to get the actual transfer to happen, but to circle back upstream to the IT, because you're right, if it's going to happen, if it's a certain record type, it's going to happen over and over again. How to build things upstream and to put people on notice, IT support and other people, so they could make it more of a routine, more practiced, less cumbersome.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So, and if anybody wants to add into the second column, your most troublesome systems. I know from the Texas State Archives story of the transfer of the Perry records, of course, he was in office a good long time. And so when you finally get the content, it's out of a system that, you might not have known existed, or the format's not really used. And so some of the challenge is time, of course. So if anybody wants to share the most troublesome systems that they're experiencing, that would be interesting to Preservica to think about. How would content come from that kind of maybe a specialized or proprietary system? So feel free to share that too in the second category. So moving on to the third category, so transfer verification and closeout. So you've successfully moved the data from the record producer over to the threshold of the archives, and of course there's work to get done to verify the authenticity, the integrity, to possibly dedupe, to make sure that what was agreed upon with the agency to send over is actually what came over, and that everything's readable before it goes into the preservation repository. So wondering about what kind of process, manual or automated, you're using to generate those verification records. And we do know that Haley and I have talked about this, of how lovely it would be if an actual record was created out of the verification process that would serve as the evidence that it had happened, that you didn't have to go and fill out a form or send it back or whatever, but that there were automated ways of generating the evidence as part of the process. So we're interested in hearing about that. And then anything you've got about normalization, are you requiring agencies to normalize the records? Are you doing that on your side of the fence? So tell us a little bit about how smoothly or not smoothly the transfer verification and closeout process goes, and any ideas you have for how that might be supported in an automated fashion. Haley, you were typing something in the chat. Let me go see what you said.
Yeah, I really liked this under the second column, hard drives, USB thumb drives. I think that's pretty typical. but then secure SharePoint site created exclusively for transfer of zip files containing records, safeguards metadata. I don't know if you could add some more detail, if it would be better on the ideas board or in the chat, but that seems like an interesting area to think about further. And certainly for the transfer verification and closeout method, it's like we have strategies for transferring paper records. You know, I think that was clearly shared with agencies, and I routinely saw agencies following those procedures, no problems. And then I think you come to electronic records, and it gets a little bit more frightening for folks, like the technology to create a manifest, either with a tool like Bagger or just sort of do like a copy as path option. And that would rely a little bit more, again, on that building that relationship and a little bit of skill sharing between agencies and the archivists, to get people comfortable with the process. But it's also, if they were able to sort of potentially do it with paper records, you know, getting everybody up to speed for electronic as well, as opposed to the idea of just taking it at their word that they transferred everything. I like that idea, but there's the technical challenge of it where you just want to verify at multiple points. So.
And I think it probably goes without saying that the more we can do upstream with agencies, setting the expectation that the records will be coming to the archives at some point, will grease the wheels a bit on the transfer process, and decisions about whether the agency will keep some or all of the records that are transferred, or if it's when they're removed from the agency site or the enterprise site. Those are all things that ideally could be discussed for new systems or new record series or new administrations, a new records coordinator in an agency. So I think right, we have to do what we have to do, and we're glad to get the records. I've talked to so many archivists who say, I'm just glad to have them, and I'll take them in whatever condition. I'll drive to wherever they are. I'll do whatever I need to do. But obviously this is it's a time-consuming process, and it's a very important process because it is puts the capstone on the intellectual and physical transfer and custody. And then of course the archives are then in control, and the ones who outsiders will come to if they need access to the records. And so it's a very, very important process. So nobody's got anything to share on transfer verification and closeout. I know you use a traditional process and you get it done. So we're definitely interested in hearing what would make your life easier. How could it be potentially automated so that there was evidence and it could go back and forth in a seamless way and not take so much staff time. So we'll leave this up for another minute. We're very interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you so much, Dan, for all the comments you had there on the SharePoint, using the SharePoint forms. And so glad to hear that it's streamlined the notification processes. That's delightful to hear. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so I think with that, we're coming up close on time. So let me switch back. We will share this out with you. And anyone who gets to, here's a recording, we'll share it with anybody who registered, right? We'll give a summary of this. So thank you so much. We thought this might be a little bit easier than having people raise their hand or unmute their mic. If you could just type, because we know that archivists are extremely articulate and good writers, and so we hope that was a useful process. Preservica's only been using the Ide Boardz recently, and so they're also interested in feedback on how that worked for you, because input from the people who know is so very, very important. So with that, I just did want to add that if you are interested, as Michael said, in joining the early access group in order to be in the loop on how Preserve 365 is coming along, and to be able to provide input, then there's a QR code here. You can also, Sean, will put it in the chat. There's also a link, I think. There you go. You can go to the Preservica website and sign up, because they're very keen to hear what's going on in your M365 universe, and how we can all collaborate in a way that will advance getting that preservation in place upstream and make it easier on our users, reduce their burden, and get more of the good stuff that the archives are looking for, that the agencies need to retain long term, in the right place and under preservation care. So with that, it turns back to CoSA to do a wrap up. So thank you all so much for your time. And to those who will hear the recording later, we're interested in your feedback. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Lori, Hallie, Gareth, Sean, for this great presentation. Are there any questions? We got a few minutes, so if anybody would like to type a question in chat that we can ask the Preservica people, here's your chance to talk to them. So we certainly want to give you that opportunity if anybody's got anything. If not, I'm sure if the question comes up afterwards, they'd be more than happy to answer anything that you have on a one-on-one basis. So not seeing any questions, we'll move on. So just reminding you that we have, we still have some, we don't have another webinar for the end of the year, but we do have an In Conversation with recording. It's with Hilda, who is the archivist and the Archives of Puerto Rico. So I do hope you'll go and check out that recording on our YouTube channel. Very informative on what she's having to go through. Sari is also, will have more upcoming webinars in 2023, so watch for those. And of course, there's always lots of ways to contact CoSA and stay in touch, and we hope you will. And then, of course, the last item is we do hope to get your feedback on our shop talks and all of our different webinars. So if you would mind doing just a couple of questions on the evaluation, we'd really appreciate it. And with that, and no other comments or questions, I'd like to thank the Preservica group. Thank you so much for a very informative shop talk today. And thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Take care. Have a great weekend. And we'll see you soon.